Proud.
Welcome everybody to the March meeting for the Relevance Researchers Network. Really pleased today to have a talk from one of our research colleagues in the University of Oslo, Camilla Sætehaug. Tried my best with the pronunciation. And she's going to be presenting to us on the pragmatics of enjambment. Again, try my best with the pronunciation of that. But I will stop talking and pass over to Camilla to take us through this. Thank you very much.
Can you see my screen, my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah. Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Kate and Ryoko, for having me. My name is Camilla, and I recently submitted my MA thesis on the pragmatics of enjambment, theory and experiment. I'm with the University of Oslo, and my supervisor is Nick Allett. In the thesis, I investigate how enjambment, a type of poetic line break, can influence interpretation during reading. So the project has two main parts. First, I develop an RT account of enjambment as an ostensive pragmatic cue that attracts attention and guides interpretation. Second, I test these predictions using a self-paced reading task. So let's begin with a simple example of enjambment. I saw a girl with one leg over the rail of a balcony. Enjambment occurs when a syntactic or a semantic unit continues across a poetic line break. Essentially, the line ends, but the structure does not. So at the end of the first line, I saw a girl with one leg. Readers may briefly imagine a one-legged girl. But when reading the second line, we revise that interpretation. We realize that the direct object of saw is a girl with one leg over the rail of a balcony, and not a girl with one leg. Enjambment may create this kind of temporary ambiguity that's resolved in the following line. So in this example, the structure may at first glance seem complete and lead to one interpretation, and the second line corrects the assumption. It makes the reader interpret the line differently. The image of the one-legged girl, though, might still stick around. It also seems that at the line break, enjambment can create this kind of clash between two priorities, where one is completing the disrupted syntax, and the other is pausing at line end. Jennifer Richter at Oregon State University was speaking to undergrads actually when she noted that enjambment may pique the reader's interest and speed up the pace of the poem or create a sense of urgency, tension, or rising emotion as the reader is pulled from one line to the next. Enjambment has long been recognized as an important stylistic device in poetry. Still, this common poetic form is underexplored from a cognitive pragmatic perspective. Literary critics like Richter seem to agree that enjambment can attract our attention. They also often describe enjambment using these two seemingly contradictory effects. On the one hand, enjambment is seen as creating suspense or tension. It can interrupt syntactic completion and delay resolution. On the other hand, it's described as creating a sense of flow or movement. It may encourage readers to move quickly across the line break to complete the syntactic unit. I ask whether these descriptions are really contradictory or whether they might reflect different manifestations of the same underlying mechanism. I argue that tension and flow may occur during different parts of reading, and that such effects may also vary between readers and contexts. So the central question is, what actually happens in the reader's mind when they encounter enjambment? I argue that literary intuitions about enjambment can be grounded in a cognitive account. Rather than representing contradictory descriptions, suspense and flow may reflect different distributions of processing effort within the same inferential process, with promises of rich effects in the end. So the core idea is that enjambment isn't just page layout or a weird line break, it may actually guide how we infer meaning in real time. To explore how enjambment might create this experience of tension and flow, I draw on relevance theory, of course. And very briefly, RT treats communication as an inferential process. The central idea is that what we say doesn't fully determine what we mean. So when we interpret an utterance, we combine linguistic input, the context, and the fact that something attracts our attention as being openly and intentionally communicated to us to work out the speaker's intended meaning. And as you know, this process is guided by expectations of relevance. And relevance is a technical term, which is about balancing processing effort and positive cognitive effects. So, put very simply, we look for an interpretation that's worth the effort we put into processing it. As you also know, RT has been widely used to analyze figurative language and other forms of weak communication in literature. And this project was actually inspired by an RRN talk that I attended by Daniel Pinder. He talks about visual spatial form and poetic effects and explores line divisions using an RT framework. I investigate enjambment specifically, both theoretically and experimentally. So, if we treat a poem as a communicative act, I argue that enjambment can function as an ostensive cue, something that draws attention and signals that extra effort will be worthwhile. In RT, ostensive cues are features that signal that something is being openly communicated. They tell the audience, hey, pay attention here, this is worth processing. I argue that enjambment does exactly that, because when a line break interrupts a syntactic or a semantic unit, it gets the reader's attention, shows communicative intent, and creates a sense of incompleteness. This prompts readers to search for the most relevant intended meaning. Before and at the line break, readers may construct provisional continuations, weak explicatures, weak implicatures, and adult concepts. At the break itself, readers may pause for an effect or rush forward to complete the syntax. They may redistribute this effort on a relevance-guided search for intended meaning. Then, when the next line resolves the syntax, some of these interpretations are confirmed, while others are revised or dropped. Still, some weak effects may linger weakly in the background, like the one-legged girl from the first example. And those lingering interpretations may contribute to the overall poetic effect, as could emotional aspects and adjusting adult concepts that you already formed. So the line break isn't just visual structure, it's also a signal that something meaningful is happening at that incomplete point in the text. This may create momentary openness and room for inference in individual interpretations. So overall, in an already slow and effortful, non-spontaneous reading, enjambment seems to attract attention, trigger the RT comprehension heuristic, increase overall effort, redistribute that effort during reading, and guide interpretation. So overall, enjambment may encourage readers to invest a little more to be rewarded by meaningful cognitive effects. Before turning to the experimental part of my thesis, let's look at this in action. Here's an example from Daughters by Lucille Clifton. Woman who shines at the head of my grandmother's bed. Here the line break interrupts the phrase at the head of my grandmother's bed. So at the end of the first line, the syntax may feel incomplete and stand out to the reader. At the line break, readers may for a moment both want to make sense of what's happening at the line break and complete the syntax. They can experience the clash between suspense and flow, pausing for effects and rushing forward. And then readers may do a few different things. First, they might pause and start interpreting woman who shines at the head in different ways. They may wonder, is the woman's head literally shining? And in that case, in what way? What's the woman's significance? But the structure is strange. It seems ungrammatical. So maybe she's shining at the head of something. Readers may anticipate continuations like a woman at the head of a household or at the head of something. And such provisional structures can be full-on propositional explicatures or partial structures in attempts to continue the phrase before resolution. Readers may also form weak implicatures, for instance, that the woman is special, protective, and maybe even supernatural or saintly. The line break can also make certain words stand out. For example, bed might be enriched into something like a deathbed, or even a final resting place, depending on the reader. Some readers may also construct adult concepts at this point. So I argue that you get this small interpretive space where meaning can be explored. But at the same time, the disruption can push the reader forward. When the second line appears, the structure becomes clear. The shining woman was at the head of the grandmother's bed and could be an image of a female saint, an icon hanging above the bed. From this, readers can reject or revise some interpretations and accept others. They may derive even more implicatures and maybe also adjust adult concepts constructed earlier in the reading. But importantly, some of the earlier interpretations may be weakly active in the mind of the reader. And that's likely part of the effect. The poet may be using the line break to highlight or intensify the image of a shining woman. Also, in line with de Saussure and Wharton, I argue that picturing the scene of a saint watching over the grandmother's bed likely triggers emotions, and perhaps even what they refer to as secondary affective effects in the reader. Crucially, how deeply the scene resonates with readers likely depends on individual experiences and memories. Someone who's been through a deathbed type of scene may picture it vividly and be moved deeply by the poem. They may start to think about their own situation and go back to how they felt at the time. Others who have not experienced something similar may just interpret it as a religious grandmother's bed and get some of the effects of the image of a shining woman. So I think Clifton's poem illustrates how enjambment may create a kind of brief suspension mixed with trying to complete the syntax. You get a moment of anticipation and exploration, and an experience of cognitive and affective effects before and after resolution. How readers use that moment may vary across readers, across poems, and probably also across types of enjambment. So, the analysis of daughters brings us back to the question of tension and flow. The RT framework allows us to reconcile these traditional descriptions of enjambment as processing effects. Among other possibilities, and based on a review of the literature, I highlight 3 possible processing strategies upon encountering enjambment in a poem. First, readers might pause at the line break and spend effort trying to explore emerging meaning based on this incomplete structure. That will give you a type of tension profile. Second, readers might do the opposite. They might move quickly forward to resolve the syntax and then spend more effort integrating the meaning. That would look more like flow. And third, readers might combine these strategies. They can, for instance, slow down slightly before the break, move quickly across the break itself, and then slow down again to integrate meaning. The important point is that all of these are different ways of distributing effort during reading. And they may, vary across readers, vary across enjambment types, and even vary within the same reading process. It's also likely that readers move back and forth during reading to fully integrate the meaning across the lines. But crucially, these strategies all lead to the same prediction. Compared to non-enjambed equivalents, enjambment should increase overall effort. And that leads directly to my empirical question. Can we actually observe this in reading time data? This RT account of enjambment generates a clear empirical prediction. If enjambment disrupts syntactic completion and encourages additional interpretive work, then we should expect it to increase overall processing effort during reading. One way to observe this is through reading time measures, which are commonly used in psycholinguistics as an indirect indicator of processing effort. I was motivated to empirically test processing effort, partly after reading Kupfs-Van-Yacht et al. From 2014. They conducted an eye tracking experiment where they actually tested enjambed lines versus non-enjambed and prose lines. My study is an SPR task. It looks at total reading times and does not include prose controls. If my account is correct, then enjambed lines should take longer to read than non-enjambed lines, all else being equal. To test the prediction, I conducted this self-paced reading task. I designed it in PCIBEX and distributed via the online recruitment platform Prolific. During the experiment, my 60 American participants revealed text line by pressing space, and reading times between key presses were recorded. The participants read short poetic fragments, each consisting of 2 lines, and each fragment appeared in 2 versions, an enjambed and a non-enjambed condition. So an enjambed item would look like, tell him I buy the books myself such, then the line break, things are important. And a non-enjambed item would be, tell him I buy the books myself, line break, such things are important. So the lexical content was identical across the conditions. The only difference between the 2 versions was the placement of the line break. In the non-enjambed condition then, the line break coincided with a syntactic boundary, and in the enjambed condition, the line break interrupted a syntactic unit. The main dependent measure was total reading time per item, reflecting overall processing effort. And I analyzed the data in R to compare reading behavior in the enjambed and non-enjambed conditions. And here are some of the results. They show that enjambed lines were associated with longer total reading times than non-enjambed lines. So this selection of 60 participants did slow down when reading enjambed lines, suggesting that enjambment is associated with an increase in overall effort. On average, enjambed lines produced a slowdown of about 240 milliseconds, or roughly 7 to 8%. A linear mixed effects model confirmed that this difference was statistically significant, while accounting for considerable variability across items and participants, which is, of course, typical for reading time data. The findings are consistent with the RT account proposed in this thesis. Enjambment, disrupting a syntactic or a semantic completion, appears to function as an ostensive cue that triggers readers to invest additional inferential work, which shows up as longer total reading times. The findings can also be in line with the possible processing strategy hypotheses launched in my theoretical approach. Overall, processing effort seems to increase. That effort, though, could be distributed and redistributed during reading. So rather than being contradictory, the suggested tension and flow effects of enjambment may reflect different distributions of effort. The experimental findings do, however, only show longer total reading times as an indicator of an increase in overall effort for Enjambment lines. And variability across participants, and to a lesser extent across items, is also important to consider. Readers are different, both in baseline reading speeds and reading strategies, as well as in how disrupted they are by Enjambment. Some readers may find Enjambment more disruptive than others. Some readers may pause while others rush forward. Others may do both, but at different times during reading. These different strategies may also correspond to the tension and flow profiles described earlier. The item variability was not as large, indicating that items were fairly similar. Nonetheless, I have discussed how the items are different in terms of how much they actually disrupt the syntax, among other things. Also, sequences of enjambed lines may prime readers and perhaps decrease effort throughout the poem compared to sporadic cases of enjambment. But I haven't looked into that. More broadly, these findings suggest that poetic form can function as a pragmatic cue guiding interpretation. A purely visual feature of the text, in this case, the placement of a line break, can influence how readers allocate processing effort and construct meaning. To conclude, this project makes 4 main contributions. First, it proposes an RT account of enjambment as both a poetic phenomenon and an ostensive pragmatic cue. Second, it integrates notions of weak communication and ad hoc concept formation into the analysis of poetic form in general and enjambment in particular. Third thesis derives a testable psycholinguistic prediction. And fourth, it provides experimental evidence suggesting that enjambment increases overall effort. Finally, a few limitations and possible future directions. Self-paced reading cannot show where processing effort occurs, nor does it say anything about cognitive effects, the other part of relevance. This study also tests 2 enjambment types only. Participants only read short poetic fragments, and the sample size is small. The study is also conducted online. Future work using eye tracking or EEG could provide more detailed evidence. Future work could also look at full poems and more varied enjambment types, or even at different visual spatial poetic devices. So ending on a bit of a poetic note, this thesis brings poetic enjambment into the domain of cognitive explanation while preserving what could make poetry compelling. I think that part of what inspires poets to write and people to read poetry is its openness and how it can make readers work a little harder. And I guess that extra work could be part of the point and part of the pleasure of reading poetry, which is not lost in an arty approach to enjambment. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much indeed. I will open the floor to questions, but while people are formulating that, I'll just say thank you very much for one of the clearest presentations I think we've ever had in this group. It was beautifully clear and beautifully presented. So thank you very much for obviously the care that you took to do that and to make it so accessible to people who maybe haven't thought about this subject before. So I think you should be congratulated on that. I have lots of questions, but I will see if anyone else. I won't take my chair's privilege quite yet in case other people have questions they're burning to ask or comments. Anybody? Okay, in that case, I will get it started with chair's privilege. I know where to start. I've got lots of different questions, partly because I'm working with a postgraduate student at the moment who's working on something that I think might have some overlap, which is incongruity resolution in jokes and also multimodal texts. Um, so I've got lots of things that I'm thinking about. But do you have any thoughts about why line breaks do this? Like, what is it to do with our expectations that a text will not have those line breaks? Is it to do with like lining up with prosodic um, units, or why do you think they might have this effect? No, I'm not your examiner. I'm not putting you on the spot, but but I'm curious as to whether your thinking about it has given you any kind of insight into that at this yet.
Yeah. I think it can be all of those things for different people. Um, but I've started to think about whether we actually expect syntactic units to continue in poetry or whether we don't, whether we actually expect enjambment in some cases or things to like, I don't know. It depends on the poet, I guess, and the tradition and things like that as well. So if
So you
we
mean when we know we're reading a piece of poetry, we might be kind of primed for odd things to happen in terms of the spacing
I,
and the line length and that kind
I've started to think about that. Um, but I also think that we are curious and want to continue the syntax or like complete it. So I think that we find it weird in some of the cases at least. There are also different enjambment types. So some of them might because some of them they seem complete at the line break, and then others are very clearly not complete. So they might also function quite differently, I think.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to ask actually about that distinction between the girl with the one leg example.
Mm,
That seems like it's complete, right? And you form an interpretation of it, and then you're forced to revise that, as opposed to the shining one where you're kind of like, what's going on here? I don't understand, and so you're pushed to read the next bit. Yeah.
yeah,
So, and that's not a contrast you've looked at particularly yet, is that right?
no,
Which is so it's
I, I
understandable. You can't
had
do.
for my experiment, I chose two types. So, and they're both perspectives, so they're very obviously disruptive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Super interesting. Ryoko, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. It was really interesting. Now, I should be showing my face, but I'm looking currently pre-human, so I'm not doing. Bit of a cold. I find it really interesting and really like the fact that you're doing combining theory and experiments. And that's kind of something I also try to do as well. But when you're doing your experiments, and you all cited the eye tracking experiments. And
Yeah.
when we look at these results, to some extent, it's something that is expected. Because if there's a line break in somewhere that's not expected, then of course it will increase cognitive load, and therefore, either with key logging or eye, eye tracking, you'd expect some sort of result
Mm.
in comparison,
Mm.
comparable to that. But for the theoretical part, you talked about, weakening pictures or ad hoc concept construction might explain.
Mm.
Um, do you think there's any way you can actually test the kind of weakening pictures or kind of ad hoc concept you can expect the readers to derive?
Mm. That's very interesting. Mm. I don't know if there are some tasks that you can create after having read the lines or something.
Yeah.
Uh, I've never tried to design anything like that, but mm,
Yeah, these are kind of experiment I would like to design
yeah,
myself, and
yeah,
I've never thought of the right way of doing that.
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
very hard because
it
I
is.
think I tried to design comprehension questions,
Mm,
and it's really hard
yeah, yeah,
because you
yeah,
don't have the same expectations of like informativeness, I think, for
yeah,
poetry.
yeah.
So it's difficult.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
And
Have you thought of any ways to do it, or is it?
I don't know, I kind of thought about like getting people to just Well, one thing that was suggested to me was think aloud, but then again, that is not always, I don't know if that is kind of theoretically valid or not, but
Mm.
yeah, that's what I myself struggle to come up with.
Mm.
Mm,
It's very
yeah,
hard.
yeah,
I'm
it is.
sorry I don't have any ideas either.
Yeah, I think we'd welcome any suggestions from anyone who might have any ideas.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, thank you. It was really, really, really interesting.
Thank you so much.
And we have a question in the chat from Billy, who can't put his sound or camera on at the moment, so I will be the voice and face of Billy. He says that was a fantastic presentation and a great study. Are you planning to look at other kinds of forms, rhyme, other aspects of layout? He says, I recently went to a talk on, I don't know if I'm saying this right, chiasmus, and thought this approach might help with that too. And he clarifies that that is when you get a pattern like X, Y, Y, X, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going, or what is Hecuba to him or he to Hecuba. So yeah, any other, have you thought of taking the kind of, yeah, I guess the model that you've established and the approach and applying it to other poetic features and
Yeah,
resources?
it would be really interesting. Um, Off the like when you read about Enjambment, you automatically also read about Caesura. So
How
it's
you
kind of
say?
like a bigger space. Is that what he said?
Oh,
Yeah.
oh no,
So
no,
it's
it's not. Sorry, that's just me not knowing how to pronounce words.
no,
The
right.
theme
But
of the
Caesura
day.
is like a bigger space between words. So it's not a line break, but it's a bigger space between the parts of the line, I guess. So that would be interesting to see if that has the same effect or if the effect is actually about moving your eyes and from the one line to the next, for instance. Also, Pinder did his theoretical study on short line length. That would also be interesting because I think it can have some of the same effects, maybe. I'm not that familiar with the is it called chiasma or something? No,
I don't know. We'll Billy
something
can't
like
correct us, so
that. Yeah.
Nick, do you know? Do you know exactly how to
Yeah,
pronounce
chiasmus.
it? It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think Billy was, if I can just jump in and help interpret a bit, I think Billy was interested in how much you were interested in just other kind of figures of speech to do with form, as it were.
Mm.
And well, I mean, I happen to know that. I mean, you got into this because you were interested in all the kind of visuospatial ways that poems are set out, right? So I don't know. Maybe it would partly answer his question to talk more about that.
Yeah, and you made me think about the first poem that I looked at, right? The long one with they're just like different letters. An E. E. Cummings poem, where there are just there's like one letter or something, two letters on the line on each line, and it forms the word loneliness. So it's yeah, things like that. I find that just page layout is very interesting.
Yeah, it is super interesting and the effect it has on us. And I've looked a bit about typography and E. Cummings, he writes his name with lowercase letters, doesn't he? But even that kind of stands out as a drawing attention to the form as well as the content.
Yeah, he definitely
D-
did it intentionally.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just put a link to that particular poem in the group chat.
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you. Other questions or comments before I keep going? I wondered if there's any sense of some of at least in some of the poems that you've looked at of a kind of an effect of sort of playfulness maybe with it or teasing or sort of tricking the reader or something like that. My student who's looking at incongruity resolution is thinking about this kind of aha effect that you have when you sort of realize, that's not what they meant. They meant this. So that particularly in the ones where you get a full interpretation, you have to revise it. Have you come across any thoughts on kind of that, what role that might play? I'm thinking in terms of the maybe the extra effects that you get as that to reward the effort. Part of it is this kind of like maybe similar to humor or satisfaction or I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. It's
Right.
And I think they did it all the way back to I've looked at a few examples from Beowulf and from Victor Hugo, um, who played with this kind of thing. He talked about a secret staircase, but only revealed that it was secret at the end of the structure. So things like that. I definitely think that that's why I think that these are intentional line breaks, right? Because they do it to have fun or make us experience this kind of aha moment, as you say. I think it's part of I think it's one of the most important effects actually, which is, yeah, at the end of it, like, because I've been looking mainly at the effect while you read, right, with the suspense and flow. But I think the effects in the end are definitely like that. Mm.
And a kind of maybe a kind of awareness of your inferential processes in a way that maybe we aren't always aware when we're not forced to revisit and re-infer things, we become aware. Ah, I thought my mind naturally went that way.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking
Maybe
aloud.
they're
I think
doing
it's
like
super
an aware.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's very interesting to hear you talk about it as well.
No, I mean, I'll be sending this recording to my PhD. He couldn't make it today because he's moving house. But I will be sending him and instructing him to watch this video.
Yeah.
Hi, Mark. Um, any other thoughts or comments from the floor? No.
Hello.
Oh,
Sorry, just a
right.
minute again. I just realized. Um, I don't know how familiar you are with Japanese haiku, the Japanese poetry. They sometimes intentionally use more syllable than it normally is expected, or have weird breaks somewhere for increased effects. Now, I am no expert at all, but I don't even know why I'm mentioning this, but maybe somewhere in our head when the form is now, Kate, you can take over my head stop, but when the form can, oh, what am I talking about? Kate,
But when
help.
the form has like an established form and
Yeah,
structure, like a
yeah,
haiku or maybe like a sonnet, if you start playing around with that, then that is a cue to extension, I guess. Yeah. And I
thank
wonder,
you.
and this thing around expectations, that was what the point I made in my typography paper was it's not
Yeah,
the it's not the bolding or the italics necessarily, it's the we're not expecting it or it stands out, and so it acts as a cue to extension. So I think all of that kind of aligns very nicely with what you're doing, Nick.
So I mean, it's a trivial example, but there's a limerick which plays with this, right? Famously, there was a young poet from Japan whose limericks didn't easily scan. When asked why this was, he said it's because I always try to fit as many syllables in the last line as I ever possibly can.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
like that. Mm.
Once you've got
Well,
expectations about something will do, about some the form something will take, then you can play with those expectations, right? And it puts
Yeah.
something together. There's been some comments in the chat as well from our colleagues in Brazil who are posting under New Pill. I think there's a few people maybe there. I wasn't sure I could identify an explicit question. It's more comments and suggestions for you. So I might leave you to take a look at those if they're in if they're well, they are relevant, I'm sure.
Explicit.
yeah,
Are
I'm
they
also
sitting
cutting and
there?
pasting them, Camilla, so
Oh,
I have a copy of them too.
Okay.
brilliant.
But
Um,
my
Again, someone
question,
else can't use camera or sound, but I think there's some useful comments in there that you might want to
really interesting.
follow on. Sure there was something else.
oh my goodness, 17 comments. There we go.
The haiku thing is really interesting.
Mm.
since nobody else is saying anything, I'm sure that that's a really interesting thing to look into. I don't think we discussed them, did we, at any point, as far as I can remember?
I think I have one haiku example, but we haven't. The thing is that I haven't really looked at specific forms or meters or things like that. I've intentionally just looked at free verse type of things.
Yeah.
Because meter is a different thing, and haikus I think are a different thing in sonnets and yeah, things like that. But it's very interesting for sure.
Yeah, and they're also sort of interesting because they play with this business about expectations, right? Because there's an expectation that they should have a kiredi, a cutting word, like they should
Mm,
have a break.
mm,
Um, so there's an expectation that there should be a discontinuity.
mm, mm.
I don't know of another poem. I mean, maybe a poem where you know there's going to be enjambment has a similar thing. Like there's a
Yeah,
structural similarity there. I had not thought about this. I'm only thinking about the connection now, thanks to Dioko.
yeah, yeah. It's really cool.
So that's mhm.
Yeah, it's also part the thing I mentioned about sporadic enjambment and sequential enjambment, I guess, it's in the same area of thought, kind of. Yeah.
I know what you mean, but I don't think the
Yeah,
others will.
sorry.
You should say more.
You have a poem that's full of like end stop lines. And then all of a sudden there's a sporadic enjambment that's just like, then it stands out more than just sequences of enjambed lines, I think. So that's also interesting.
Yeah, I think that definitely makes sense in terms of expectations and processing effort. And if once you're expecting something, you're more primed for it and it's less effortful. And when it's suddenly unexpected, draws your attention to it. Billy's asked whether your paper is viewable or shareable, whether
I
your
can
work.
share it if you want. Yeah, I can share it. Would you like me to share it in the chat? I would love people to read my papers.
I think people would love to read it. Yeah, Billy's asked. He said he'd love to read it. In fact, so yeah,
Okay.
please do share.
Yeah, I can share it. It's
Give you
not
time.
published anywhere. It's just going to be, it's being graded as we speak. Let's see. Okay.
Okay, so the Brazilian contributors are saying they've got work that if you can get it translated, sounds like it would be nice and relevant to what you're doing. And Billy said, have you looked at Nigel Fabb's work on form being inferred?
Yes, a little bit. I have. That was, yeah, probably. I have to look more at that because I've looked a lot at Pilkington and Pinder and only a little bit. Because Fab talks about enjambment as increasing processing effort. That's kind of like the work that I've looked at from him on this. Yeah. And he also talks about how regular forms may be different from sporadic cases. So things, but I haven't looked at. Do you have a particular paper in mind, Billy, or is it form? Because I think I've seen it in one of his books. Oh, right. Yeah.
So I'll just read this out for the recording as well. As in, the existence of a line is inferred partly on evidence from rhythm and sound, page layout, and other things, so that an enjambment would be a case where there is contradicting evidence about forms.
Yeah.
And he's going to remind himself where he read it.
Yeah. I've read that too. I didn't include it, actually. Yeah, thank you. It's great. I'll have a look to see if I can find it as well. But yeah, it gets quite existential if you go down to lines being inferred, I think. So it's a different level, I feel like, than, or a level above was kind of what I noted. I don't know. I have to reread it as well.
Well, I think we have grilled you probably enough. Thank you for your really interesting presentation. Um, I found it super interesting. I think lots of other people did as well, and it's very clear. And good luck with your grading.